Hi, so you'll see on my workflow page that I've put some illustrations around the page, and I'm just contextualising them now. So these are all pictures that I initially found to do some drawings based on, which kind of were reflecting my experience of doing the PhD application. And then after deciding to do a performance lecture, I've instead kind of selected and adapted the images. All the references are in the performance documentation pack at the bottom, but because I've just put them in through the workflow page, I just wanted to really quickly go through them now and just explain why I've selected each of the images. And you can see the more detailed pictures actually on the workflow page. So this is just the poster for the performance I intended to do on the 2nd of December, on 2nd of January, and it's structured as basically using 2 sets of Pomodoro timers. So this is a kind of like 25-minute chunk of time that's supposed to be a way of really organising your... It's basically a way of being more productive when you're working. So the idea is that you work for 20 minutes without taking a break, and then the alarm goes off, then you have a 5-minute break, and then you reset another 25-minute Pomodoro. And it's a kind of technique that's quite often taught to students, and I started trying to adopt it while I was writing my PhD proposal, so I've kind of used that as a way of structuring the performance with a 5-minute break in between. And then in each of those sections there are kind of different things like lectures, like 2 short lectures, activities, and in one part I go through these images and I'll just explain why I've selected them. So I'm just going to do a rough version of that now. So this first image is basically supposed to represent this feeling that I've had while I've been doing the research, which is basically that you're kind of trying to walk forward towards the deadline, developing your work, and you can't really see anything that's in front of you. I found there was quite a lack of transparency over some of the processes and things while I was doing the PhD proposal. I wasn't always... There's very little information about various funding deadlines, UAL internal procedures around the funding applications, and I quite often found that I was completely at the mercy of the insider knowledge of my supervisor, and sometimes she didn't quite have things right, so deadlines would crop up that I didn't know were there. So that the unlaced shoelaces with this foot walking forward, it's kind of supposed to represent the fact that you kind of trying to keep going, but you feel like you might just fall over at any stage, and you can't really see where you're going. This is kind of the same, representing the same thing. Obviously, this person can't see what they're. Sometimes it just feels like quite a battle. Obviously, I was doing the proposal while I was doing working full time. I was trying to do the PG cert, and sometimes it just feels kind of grey, and the main thing you're doing is just working. I think because that's something I think is obviously the case with PhD proposal. PhD itself is a lot of work, but I think because of this, I was reflecting and thinking about this threshold into the PhD, which is the application process, which you're kind of doing obviously in the edges of your free time. So it's a slightly different experience because it's kind of usually additional to other work. This is just a still from a film called Tetsuo Iron Man, which is it's like a Japanese horror film from the 90s, when this man kind of turns into a mass of metal. And the reason I've included it is because through the experience of actually reflecting on the process of doing the application, I've written a bit about this in one of the lectures that's in the documentation pack. I basically wanted to convey the experience initially through drawings, but I found eventually that I found it really hard to talk about the experience without using my laptop or bringing up images on my laptop, and that I've basically become completely connected to my laptop and hardly had any time away from it for the past few months. So this kind of represents that kind of man-machine thing that I was experiencing, that I found quite troubling. Didn't enjoy that aspect. And this is just a really small picture of a laptop. It's basically about the kind of sameness of research. So obviously you're researching new things and you're learning new things, and every day is different and interesting in that way. But also you're quite often just sitting at a computer, looking at a computer screen day after day, and that's quite challenging. These two images, they're about this kind of strategizing that goes into the process of doing a research proposal, and how it's not just a case of like coming up with a good idea and then developing it and trying to persuade someone. It's about kind of placing yourself in a wider context, what else is already out there, and then really lots of internal bits and pieces of information that you just don't know. So what kinds of proposals that this funder might like, how, you know, I found I had lots of conversations with my supervisor, my potential supervisor, which involved quite a bit of sort of strategizing around it. And I was thinking that if you don't have that support of someone, I'm working with someone I was doing my masters with, plenty of people might not have that, and there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes strategizing that you might not be aware of as part of the process unless you're actually in it. These are kind of the more positive aspects. So this first one with the like this just like really nice table of food, it's basically about how on a really good day you kind of feel like you know, doing a PhD and applying for a PhD, it's a really amazing opportunity to spend a decent amount of time researching something. Like, it's a question that I've developed, so I'm not applying for a pre-existing project, so I'm kind of on the threshold of the opportunity to learn a lot, read about things I'm interested in, develop arguments, make connections with people, be part of a research community, and that's like really exciting. And this picture is about like the supervisor relationship basically, and how it's actually a really generous relationship, especially in this transitional bit where I'm kind of applying for the PhD. The person I'm working with obviously currently isn't my supervisor, she's a potential supervisor, but yeah, she's still spending quite a lot of time supporting me, and that's a really generous thing. It's kind of quite a unique, I've been in obviously employment and things for 10 years after doing my degree, and you know, it's a really unique relationship that's sometimes hard to negotiate, but also quite lucky to have someone as a mentor and someone you can trust, and it's a good thing. Yeah, this is kind of about just feeling really stressed and feeling like kind of waking up quite a lot at night with lots of different ideas in my head that that I can't switch off from. So all these different boxes just represent all these different weights and things that you're thinking about all the time. Yeah, I did find it quite hard to switch off from the work. Yeah, and this last one is kind of about, I guess this bird represents my research proposal, and all these legs are actually all the different people that are kind of trying to get this big fat thing off the ground. Because at the moment it's still a proposal, it's not off the ground, it's just an idea. But yeah, I've had like input from family, from friends, from people who have proofread for me, to people who have just listened to me talk about it, potential supervisors that have spent weekends and various bits of time helping me. So this is kind of about the fact that often the PhD is kind of really represented as a single person just going through this research process, but that's really not what it's like at all, not necessarily. And that's it. Thank you.